So, the things we tend to see as normal, in more generally all kinds of beliefs and stereotypes, are formed very early on, as soon as we manage to communicate with our parents, in particular, and as soon as this communication begins to convey information. It can also be nonverbal, which it formally always is. However, the interpretation of information is quite chaotic at this age, and for yet another few years, as long as the brain keeps forming and as the child still has a lot to learn. The problem, though, is that children don't have innate, or at least reliable, critical thinking, so the quality of the information that they digest is often quite variable. The reaction, negative or positive, to all information presented is quite random at start, given that children go from phases of complete and uncritical approval to phases where they negate pretty much any statement, as well as periods where they will ask why to pretty much everything. There are then two factors which allow the child to order this mindful mess, or at least two main factors. First of all, with each new information that is provided to the child, they'll make connections with what they already know, and will react accordingly in an ever more coherent way that stabilizes with an ever larger amount of information digested. However, another factor is pressing them in a way to conform to certain ideas, to certain directions. And this thing is called socialization. The thing is, as long as there is a fairly coherent social structure, socialization and indeed conformism on a larger scale will never cease to exist. It will guide people towards certain sets of beliefs, stereotypes, and, norms, and it will lead them to reject other kind of preconceived ideas, even if they had all the reasons to defend them. This is obviously a problem when, like me, you try to defend a more direct, participatory, and even downright anarchistic kind of democracy. This is because socialization and conformism on a larger scale skews people towards certain directions without them even realizing it, and therefore infringing on their freedom as well as on their reasoning abilities. Socialization and conformism are therefore forms of societal manipulation, and political projects only try to shift mores where they want them to be, which makes a large part of them more or less liberticidal, but that's basically what normalization is all about. Still, I think we can soften the negative sides of each of these social manipulations, whether it is socialization, conformism, or even normalization, when we rather address our fellow militants. So I have two ideas, and this is basically what this video is gonna talk about anyway. So, on one hand, I think that you have to make clear and take responsibility for what you're trying to normalize, and make it as clear as possible to the people we speak with. The first advantage of this approach is that it avoids making us fall into dogmatism, even if we can always be very radical, obviously, or at least it tends to avoid dogmatism with regards to political projects, at least, since if there is an aspect that is proven to be harmful to your objective, you kind of have to accept to make changes, sometimes quite extreme ones, on the political project itself. Secondly, this approach allows for greater ideological flexibility in the society that you want to build, proportionally to a minimum set of goals. So, for example, my main political goal is going to be to minimize suffering, to minimize individual constraints, life hardship in a way, and a bit of everything that's related to these ideas. Not necessarily the maximization of happiness, though. Although I think that's nice, I will say that it's more of an extra than an end in and of itself. Sure, this will skew the Overton window quite a bit, because this objective tends to be more compatible with anti-capitalism, transhumanism, libertine, communism, veganism, etc. And therefore, theoretically, gatekeeps ideologies that don't fit into these neat categories. Yeah, I'd say that this goal is wide enough to attract sufficiently many people. People can interpret these ideas in very different ways, but as long as we agree on the form, kind of, I guess that's fine. While still being specific enough, to ensure that I will get along with them. So yeah, I guess we're set on that now. Actually, no, not really. You can't just say it one time like that, like as a sort of little aborting. As I said, you have to make your goals known in order to prevent people from trusting you a little bit too much, and to allow them to directly know your positions, at least your current positions, because you shouldn't be narrow-minded, about your current goals either. You still need to update your positions with each new info. For this, I recommend reading more about and watching more about Bayesian inference, since that's the meat that I try to defend the most. And I also talked a little bit about this, no, actually a big bit about this in my video on constructivism, rehabilitative justice, and transhumanism. So here's the time code below in case you want to check it out. On the other hand, it's not enough to be honest about our intentions. We must ensure certain critical coverage by allowing people to openly criticize the government in place, the initiatives taken, the very structure of society, etc., and let people spread these criticisms as widely as possible, as long as they too help people point out strong and constructive counter arguments to them. So it's necessary to make as accessible and as widespread as possible the use of critical tools, allowing to deeply and radically question in a constructive manner the political, economic, and social structure in which individuals find themselves, and to ease as much as possible the dismantlement of the political structure itself accordingly, if it kind of fails, You might think this is the political equivalent of digging one's own grave, but just like I said, I just want people to be able to question everything in a constructive and critical fashion. If despite as close an expansion as there can be of social, political, and other kinds of norms, we cannot find a way to come closer to our goals, or at least the most effective solutions to the remaining problems can still operate within the current structure, then we could say it's a fairly successful political project, I guess. Or at least if we manage to find unsolvable problems within the current political structure, then we can clearly talk about a failed political project. We must take a critical look at any political project that wants to be an end in and of itself. So it's necessary to invest, or at least to invest yourself, into providing an education that systematically follows this kind of critical look, and does not just mention a few quick criticisms like that for virtue signaling points of sorts. Of course, these tips only work if you take a dim view, like myself, at the ideas of viciously manipulating an entire population for your pleasure of living people in total ignorance about everything, of creating an unstable and violent political climate, or even to impose a kind of ideological dogmatism. Otherwise, I guess you could do exactly the opposite that I say.